Turnip Todger, gentleman's spy, tagline, he's got no training, no clue, and far too many cravats, but he's Britain's last hope. Part 1. Knighted by Accident. Chapter 1. The Flaming Salad Incident, or How a Cucumber Caused a Diplomatic Inferno. Lord Barnaby Archibald Percival Ignatius Todger, known to society somewhat unfairly as Turnip, was not what one might call a man of consequence. In fact, if one were to hold a séance and ask the spirits of empire, reason, or functional cutlery what they thought of Lord Todger, one would be met with awkward silence and the faint sound of someone tutting from beyond the veil. At the precise moment our tale begins, Todger was attending a diplomatic luncheon at the Royal Botanical Institute. He had not been invited. He had, however, wandered in after mistaking a topiary exhibit for a gentleman's club. "Ah," he said cheerily, tipping his hat to a startled footman. "Capital chandelier, very leafy." The luncheon was an important affair. Ambassadors from France, Prussia, Belgium, and Basingstoke had gathered to witness the signing of the Treaty of Leafy Intent, a largely symbolic document declaring mutual respect between nations in matters of herbaceous border maintenance. Todger, who believed diplomacy was a kind of hat, had already stolen someone's seat, accidentally ordered 3 absinthes, and was attempting to butter a linen napkin. It is important to understand that Barnaby Todger was not malicious. He simply suffered from a condition known in aristocratic circles as extremely British delusion syndrome, EBBDS, a chronic inability to recognize when one is not the center of a given event. Across the hall, the French ambassador, Monsieur Lavage, rose to make a toast. He was a small man with a magnificent moustache shaped like a pair of accusing eyebrows. "To peace," he declared, raising his glass. "To peace," shouted Todger from the back, mishearing and standing up to clap. "Bravo, garden peas, the unifiers of Europe." Several diplomats blinked. One Prussian delegate muttered something about English vegetables and reached for a pistol. Before matters could escalate, a waiter approached Todger's table, bearing a tray of flambéed citrus salad, a new French delicacy involving oranges, brandy, and the sort of flame one usually associates with dirigible disasters. Now, one might reasonably ask, what sort of salad requires open flame? The answer, unfortunately, is French salad, an invention designed specifically to irritate the British. Todger, unfamiliar with both French customs and the concept of danger, assumed it was a birthday cake. "Oh, splendid," he exclaimed. "Are we celebrating something? A new shrub? A diplomatic topiary?" And then, because fate, when dealing with Todger, is easily bored, he leaned forward to blow out the flame. It would have ended there had he not also been chewing an extremely minty eucalyptus lozenge at the time. This, mixed with the flammable citrus mist and the unfortunate trajectory of his upper lip, resulted in the first documented case of spontaneous mustache ignition at an international event. Flames whooshed. Cutlery clattered. The Queen's corgi barked in horror and leapt into a bowl of trifle. Monsieur Lavage screamed something deeply poetic in French, roughly translated as, "Oh, no, not again," and dived under a table. Todger, now semi-ablaze, turned to the nearest waiter and said, "Do you have a towel or a small lake?" What followed was described in the official report, which was later pulped for national security reasons, as a scene of culinary combustion, mass hysteria, and vegetable-based violence. One Belgian dignitary attempted to douse Todger with champagne. Another tried to stab the salad, presumably as a warning to others. Someone fainted. Someone else proposed. A fiddle player began playing the national anthem of Luxembourg purely out of habit. Todger, for his part, was remarkably calm. "I say," he muttered, patting his smoking waistcoat with a bread roll. That escalated rather briskly. Moments later, a footman, presumably trained in flame suppression, or simply accustomed to aristocrats catching fire, doused him with a tablecloth and 2 bottles of Perrier. The blaze was extinguished. The treaty was not signed. The French stormed out, muttering about sabotage. The Queen's corgi had to be consoled with pheasant jelly. And Lord Barnaby Todger? He was knighted, but not for bravery, nor culinary diplomacy, nor even for not dying in flames. You see, the telegram sent to Buckingham Palace following the incident read, "Todger, flamed salad. French fled. Treaty dead. British stood tall. Promote at once." The palace, unfamiliar with punctuation and short on staff that day, interpreted it as Todger, flamed. Salad. French fled. Treaty. Dead British. Stood tall. Promote at once. Believing he had died heroically, Queen Victoria approved an immediate posthumous knighthood. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your views on hereditary idiocy, Todger remained very much alive and mildly damp. The medal was pinned to him by a junior undersecretary in a tea room near Charing Cross, where Todger was found 2 hours later attempting to order unexploded scones. He was given a title, a plaque, and a mysterious brown envelope stamped "Top Vege." He thought it was a recipe card and used it to wipe chutney from his monocle. And so it was, on the back of a flaming salad, a mint lozenge, and one particularly confused telegram, that Lord Barnaby Turnip Todger became Sir Todger, Knight of the Empire, national curiosity, an accidental entrant into Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Vegetable Division. As for the rest of the diplomatic fallout, it was quietly covered up by declaring the entire incident avant-garde culinary theatre and fining the French for copyright infringement. But somewhere in the east wing of the palace, behind a door labelled SIVD Archives, Classified Routes, a new file was opened. Agent, the route, code name, turnips, status, activated by error. The Empire had found its next great spy. He just hadn't been told yet. Chapter 2. The Queen's Misstep. The catastrophic consequences of a misaddressed telegram. In the annals of royal bureaucracy, which, if unspooled end-to-end, could circumnavigate the globe and still arrive 2 weeks late, few errors match the diplomatic absurdity of Telegram No. 37B, knighthood confirmation urgent. The telegram in question was meant for Colonel Archibald Todger, a battle-hardened hero of the Mahdist War, decorated for bravery, fluent in 6 languages, including semaphore, and widely regarded as the man who once negotiated a ceasefire using only a moustache and a tin of condensed milk. Instead, the telegram was delivered via trembling footman and one confused pigeon to a very different Todger. Lord Barnaby Turnip Todger, the only known English peer to be banned from 3 gentlemen's clubs for overuse of pickle metaphors and accidentally founding a cult dedicated to radish worship, misunderstanding, he claimed, involving hats. Now, let us not cast aspersions on the Royal Post, a venerable institution whose only crime is being spectacularly unfit for the delivery of anything more urgent than a fruitcake. But on that particular Wednesday, the Royal Postmaster, Sir Clive Bumblethwaite, retired, was simultaneously juggling a gout attack, a case of mistaken identity involving twin dachshunds, and an intense desire to finish his marmalade sandwich. In such circumstances, Todger confusion was inevitable. The telegram, written on stiff cream paper and sealed with the Queen's personal wax stamp, depicting a stoic corgi flanked by thunderclouds, read, "To Todger, Barnaby Archibald, for your exemplary valor in service to Empire, Her Majesty commands you to attend Buckingham Palace post haste. A knighthood shall be bestowed. Bring a hat. God save the Queen." Lord Parsnip, Royal Secretary of Telegrammatic Affairs, Turnip Todger, who at the time was trying to teach his ferret to play cribbage using cheese squares, took one glance at the note and assumed two things. One, that it was about time someone noticed his work with vegetable sculpture, and that exemplary valor referred to the time he'd fought off a badger with a garden trowel. Technically, the badger had left on its own, but Todger had glared meaningfully at it for a solid minute beforehand. Whiskers, he called, holding the telegram aloft, like Moses revealing the dietary restrictions. "Fetch my formal waistcoat. I'm to be knighted." The ferret, for his part, sniffed the telegram, ate part of it, and resumed cleaning his tail. Meanwhile, in a tent somewhere near Khartoum, Colonel Archibald Todger, grizzled, sun-baked, and in the middle of planning a counterinsurgency using semaphore and angry goats, was confused to receive a very different telegram. "To Todger, Archibald Colonel, stop. Salad incident has resolved. Knighthood not required. Continue campaign. God save the Queen." Lord Parsnip, Colonel Todger, stared at it for a moment, scratched his moustache, which had its own postal code, and muttered, "Salad?" Then he turned to his adjutant and said something that would echo through British military legend for decades. "Bring me the goat." Back in London, the palace was in a state of mild uproar, which, in royal terms, meant someone had misplaced a napkin and 4 footmen had fainted from stress. Lord Parsnip himself was reviewing telegram responses when he spotted something curious, a calligraphy-scrawled thank you note written in violet ink and smelling faintly of horseradish. "Dear Queen," it read, "much obliged for the knighthood. Shall attend with hat and chutney spoon. Hope this isn't about the flaming salad. Yours vegetably, Turnip Todger." Escarlate Parsnip paled. He rang a bell, called for a sherry, rang the bell again, then shouted at a passing page, "Fetch the list of active Todgers." The page returned 3 hours later with 2 documents, one listing British military personnel and one listing the top 5 complaints about Lord Barnaby Todger from the Royal Horticultural Society. Realization dawned like a soggy sunrise. "Oh dear God," Parsnip whispered, spilling his sherry onto a corgi-shaped doily. "We've knighted the idiot." Despite efforts to halt the error, the machinery of Empire had already clanked into motion. A carriage was dispatched. A sash was prepared. A ceremonial sword was polished and unfortunately sharpened. By the time anyone thought to ask which Todger was to be knighted, Turnip had already arrived at the palace dressed in full cricket whites, a fox fur stole, and what he described as his emergency knighting hat, a plumed monstrosity previously banned in 3 counties. He greeted the guards with, "Jolly weather for a swording, what?" and was ushered inside before someone noticed he'd brought a thermos of beetroot gin. Queen Victoria, who had already presided over 3 ribbon cuttings, 2 balustrade unveilings, and an attempted assassination foiled by a swan, was not in the mood for question. The moment Turnip bowed, nearly falling face first into the royal shins, the sword came down with a firm, ceremonial whack. "You are hereby a knight of the realm," Her Majesty declared, failing to recognize the man she'd last seen, attempting to seduce a statue of Sir Walter Raleigh at a garden party.
"Smashing," Todger beamed. "Do I get a whistle?"
Thus was Britain's least competent nobleman made Sir Turnip Todger, KBE, SIVD eligible, and a walking clerical error. And so the file was opened. The mistake was ignored. And the world continued to turn, mostly out of inertia and the smell of overcooked mutton. But in the secret corridors of the palace, beneath portraits of solemn monarchs and maps of once important colonies, a message was passed quietly from hand to hand. The route has been activated, and nobody, certainly not Todger, had the faintest idea what that meant. Chapter 3. Sir Turnip of Nowhere in Particular, or Why Bureaucracy is Afraid of Confidence in a Cravat. The thing about titles, especially in 1894, is that no one actually checks them. Titles, you see, operate not unlike mild hallucinations. If you say it with enough certainty, wear something vaguely velvet, and keep your upper lip stiff enough to repel cannon fire, people will believe anything. Which is precisely how Lord Barnaby, Turnip Todger, amateur horologist, unlicensed marmalade vendor, and part-time beetroot hypnotist, became Sir Turnip of Nowhere in Particular, Knight of the Realm, despite not possessing land, lineage, or the ability to spell chivalry without assistance. The secret? He looked like he belonged. That is to say, he wore a hat with feathers, a sash with medals borrowed from a marching band, and carried a cane that occasionally dispensed cheese when tapped thrice. In aristocratic circles, this was more than enough. It began the morning after the knighthood, when Sir Turnip stepped out of his lodgings, a converted greenhouse above a sausage shop in Pimlico, wearing his full regalia. A tangerine smoking jacket, striped trousers once banned by the East India Company, and a monocle so large it briefly reflected sunlight into Norway. He was greeted by his landlady, Mrs. Crumble, who peered over her laundry line with the same expression one reserves for newly sentient radishes. "You're dressed like a plum, Mr. Todger." "Sir Todger," he corrected, tipping his monocle in a motion that caused a pigeon to lose altitude. "Knighted yesterday, didn't you hear the Queen's sword sing through the air of destiny?" "I heard a clank and someone yelping about his foot." "That was me. Heroism often involves toes." At Whitehall, news of Todger's ascension spread through the halls of government like a lukewarm sherry spill, slow, sticky, and entirely uncleanable. The official record, cross-referenced against the wrong Todger, still somewhere in Khartoum interrogating goats, read simply, "Sir Turnip, Todger Knight of the Realm status." The route, cleared for classified operations, specialist skill, undefined reputation formidable. Footnote: according to a startled clergyman in Clapham who once mistook Todger for a ghost. No one quite knew where he'd come from. No one quite knew what he did. But the file existed. The stamp was royal, and the man wore epaulets made of egg spoons. So no one questioned it. At the Ministry of Vegetal Espionage, a small, windowless office hidden behind a painting of Admiral Broccoli, Colonel Horace Bladderwick was preparing a mission brief with the intensity of a man who'd recently mistaken a pineapple for a grenade. "Who the devil is this Todger fellow?" he asked, frowning at the file, which contained 3 pages of gibberish, a pressed turnip, and a doodle of a dancing courgette. His aide, Lieutenant Prim, consulted the latest SIVD codex. "He's classified under Extreme Rhizomatic Threat Prevention, sir." "Rhizomatic what?" "Root-based countermeasures, sir." "Potatoes, yams, the lot." "Top brass stuff." Bladderwick squinted at the doodle. "He looks like he's fencing with a leek." "Symbolism, sir." Bladderwick grunted and stubbed his cigar out in a tea cake. "Well, no one fakes a title that confidently." Better not to ask questions. Send him the brief. Meanwhile, in the drawing room of the Society for the Advancement of Really Rather Pointless Titles, Sir Turnip was being toasted with cheap port and polite panic. "You say you're a knight?" asked Sir Marmaduke Fobbs, a man whose own title had been inherited after an uncle choked on a ceremonial napkin. "Indubitably," Todger replied, swirling his port with the authority of a man who'd never passed a decanter correctly. "And where is nowhere in particular located?" asked another, squinting suspiciously. "Ah," Todger said, eyes sparkling. "It is everywhere and nowhere. Like faith. Or wasps." "Ooh," several gentlemen murmured, nodding gravely. No one wanted to be the one to admit they'd never heard of a wasp duchy. Lady Arabella Brashwhistle, seated near the pianoforte, raised an eyebrow so sharp it could have sliced a Stilton. "Do you have any land at all?" she asked, voice laced with skepticism and pipe smoke. "I have a very promising window box," said Todger. "Parsley mostly, and a rogue carrot." Arabella snorted. "You're bluffing." "Yes," Todger beamed. But convincingly. Later, as he walked through Hyde Park, pigeons parted before him like bureaucrats before a deadline. A pair of American tourists asked for his autograph. A basset hound saluted. Even the ducks respected the sash. He stopped briefly at a bench to re-oil his cheese-dispensing cane, where Brigadier Whiskers emerged from a bush wearing a hat. "Ah, Whiskers," Todger said. "What news?" The ferret squeaked once, rolled his eyes, and dropped a scroll of paper from his tiny satchel. On it, a mission order. Operation Cabbage Yee. Whistle, priority, code route, target, von Kohlrabi. Todger mused. A villain named after coleslaw, promising. He looked out over the lake, where swans bobbed in blissful ignorance of Europe's looming brassica-fueled doom. Let's see how far a fake knight with a real ferret can get. Back at the palace, Lord Parsnip stared at the updated Todger file. It had just been returned from the War Office bearing the stamp, authenticated. He blinked, rubbed his temples, and poured another sherry. "You knight one man by accident," he muttered, and suddenly he's infiltrating Prussia with a cheese stick and a hat full of lies. But still, no one questioned Sir Turnip's title. Not the bureaucrats. Not the generals. Not even the Queen, who merely looked vaguely at him during a banquet and whispered, "Did I knight you before or after the flaming salad?" Sir Turnip Todger, KBE, of nowhere in particular, simply smiled and bowed. For in matters of espionage, as in matters of British society, confidence was 9/10 of the cravat.